Hi everybody, welcome back to Anna Reads, and if you'll notice, I'm a little more dressed up for the occasion. There's a reason for that. This is called Disneybounding. Shout out to Leslie Kay for starting that. This is Luther. He's in the way. He's absolutely adorable. He's purring and now I'm going to bother him relentlessly. The next installment of Anna Reads is a subject very, very special to me. This man changed the world. You can't deny it. Like it or hate it, you can't deny it. Walt Disney, an American Original by Bob Thomas. Before I sit here and rant at you all afternoon, I'm going to jump right into the preface to the Hyperion Edition. Now, this is the Disney edition and the authorized biography of Walter Elias Disney. My father was not a complicated man. Diane Disney Miller was speaking in late 1993 at the office of Retlaw, a mile from the studio that Walt and Roy Disney had founded 70 years before. Walt had established the backwards spelled Retlaw in 1952 to protect the use of his name and to finance the designing of Disneyland. I think Dad was very easy to read, Diane continued. He didn't want to be complicated. He was always straightforward, never devious. Not unless he could be devious in a constructive way. When he was making Mary Poppins, the people involved with the picture would go to the daily rushes and they'd see Song of the South. They were confused. They thought, Jiminy Christmas, does Walt want to put animation in this picture? They knew that P.L. Travers, the author of Mary Poppins, had said she didn't want any animation. What Dad was doing was planting the seed. He might want to use animation in Mary Poppins. And he did. Diane talked about Walt Disney in the role that she knew best, as a father. My Aunt Ruth told me that Dad once said, I want to have 10 kids and I'm going to let them do anything they want. That's pretty much the way he treated Sharon and me. He gave us liberty, but he didn't spoil us. Like a lot of adolescent girls, I was crazy about horses, and I got quite good at riding. I yearned for my own horse, but Dad wouldn't buy one, and we didn't have a lot of clothes and other things. He didn't want me to work. Some of my friends got summer jobs, but Dad wouldn't let me. You'd just take a job from someone who needs one, he said. Maybe it was that. Maybe he felt that he had worked all his life and he didn't want his kids to do the same thing. It never occurred to me to be part of the studio, and he never pushed me. The only time Sharon and I would go to the studio was on Sunday. We followed him around from room to room as he looked at the work that was being done. Later, when he started building his train, we went with him to the machine shop where he worked with Roger Broggie. We always ate dinner late because Dad worked late at the studio. He would tell about what he was doing, but he also wanted to know about our lives too. And he would listen. I don't think he had a fierce temper, but there were times I felt his temper. When I was 15 or 16 and just starting to drive, I wasn't home very much. He didn't like that. When we were on vacation in Palm Springs, I hung out at the Zanuck's house, which was wide open for all of Susan's and Darylyn's friends. I was there all the time with Dad's car, a beautiful Olds convertible. I came home one day and he snapped, You're running a rat race. You're never here. Why am I here if you're never around? I'm leaving. And he went back to the studio. A day or so later, I was driving down Indian Avenue and I passed a car on the right. It made a right turn into my dad's fender. I called him and cried, Oh, Daddy, I had an accident in your car. He said, I'll be right there. He drove right down. Not a word of recrimination. That's the way he was. He only got mad when he felt hurt. Diane Disney Miller was speaking out in reaction to revisionist histories that have attempted to paint a far different picture from the father she knew. Those conceptions also differ sharply from the Walt Disney I interviewed and observed over 30 years as a reporter, as well as 3 years spent in researching and writing his biography. Not that he was saint-like. He could be aloof, angry, wrong-headed, intemperate. His accomplishments outweighed such foibles. The project began in 1973 when I was invited to lunch with a few Disney executives at the studio. Card Walker, president of the Walt Disney Company, represented the management, and Ron Miller, vice president of production and Walt's son-in-law, spoke for the family. We've had 2 writers try their hands at writing Walt's biography, and neither of them proved satisfactory, said Walker, a tall, persuasive man whom I first knew when he worked in the publicity department. We'd like you to undertake it. You can have complete access to all the studio personnel and all the records. The family would like to see Walt's story written, and they will be completely available for your research. I was assured by Miller, who still looked like an offensive end for the Los Angeles Rams, as he once was. You will have complete freedom to write Walt's story as you see it. The proposal was irresistible. I had written biographies of Harry Cohn, Irving Thalberg, David O. Selznick, and Walter Winchell, always without official sanction. In one aspect, that was preferable. I enjoyed the freedom to write frankly about those persons without fear of offending sensitivities. The drawback was that working on the outside denied me access to most family members, as well as others who declined to be interviewed for fear of reprisal. Access to letters and official documents was also hampered. The Disney offer seemed ideal. I would be able to interview all those still living who worked closely with Walt, as well as members of his family, and I could explore the company archives without restriction. Importantly, I had been assured that I could interpret Walt's life without fear of compromising my standards as a reporter and biographer. Ron Miller's assurance held true. In only one instance did I hedge on information: the fact that Sharon Disney had been adopted. Over the years, the family had not publicized Sharon's adoption because she had been sensitive about it. Sharon Disney Lund died in early 1993. I myself am also adopted, and it really warms my heart that one of the humans I admire most in my life was an adoptive parent, because my mom and dad, they've been awesome. Mostly. I enjoyed a head start on the biography. In 1956, Walt had asked me to write a book about animation at the studio. Coincidentally, 2 other writers had been assigned to the project, but each had failed. Walt explained, "Look, I've been taking all the bows here. Everything is a Walt Disney picture. I did that for a reason. I wanted people to know that when they saw Walt Disney on a picture, they would know that meant good family entertainment. Now I want to give credit to the guys who have made those pictures for me." Having brought to the task only the faintest knowledge of how animation works, I began interviewing animators, storymen, background artists, composers, layout artists, directors, and anyone else involved in the production process. Now, I don't know if he means BG the way I understand BG, like extras, background actors. or the folks who designed the backgrounds for the animated pictures, because those are obviously very different folks. Composers, layout artists, directors, and anyone else involved in the production process. I also delved into the history of the Disney studio and of animation itself, from cave drawings to Gertie the dinosaur to Sleeping Beauty. The result was The Art of Animation. I think I actually have that book somewhere, and it might wind up in the queue. Then, in 1965, a publisher suggested that I write a biography of Walt Disney for children. The book would be published outside Disney Company auspices, but I was allowed to proceed. Knowing that Walt was heavily involved with a full production schedule, his television show, a proposed theme park in Florida, new attractions for Disneyland, and a host of other projects, I expected to write the book from file material. But Walt insisted on giving me 4 lengthy interviews. He dwelled on his early years on the farm in Marceline, as a newspaper delivery boy in Kansas City, and as a student and mailman in Chicago. He seemed eager to sum up the lessons he had learned as a boy and tell young people how he applied them in his later life. He died within a year of the interviews. For someone famed worldwide for 40 years, Walt Disney the man was little known. Partly this was due to the exigencies of the Hollywood image factory. Joe Reddy, a jovial Irishman with a passion for cigars and Notre Dame football, conducted Disney's press relations with the same skill he had exercised with his former clients, Harold Lloyd and Shirley Temple. Reddy knew when to fuel up the publicity machine and when to cool it down, how to zigzag through hostile journalists and cultivate friendly ones. He also had the wisdom to realize that Walt was his own best publicist. Joe merely introduced an interviewer to the boss and leaned back and puffed his cigar. In interviews, Walt rarely indulged in retrospection. His visionary eye focused on the future. The completion of an animated feature might be 3 years hence, but he could relate it in striking detail. Most of his conversation dealt with future projects, and they seemed to be forming shapes and patterns as he was speaking. So while interviewers came away dazzled by the creative surge of Walt's imagination, they had learned little about the wellspring of his talent. In 1956, Walt gave lengthy interviews to his daughter Diane and Pete Martin, a feature writer of the Saturday Evening Post, for a series of articles in the magazine, and later a book, The Story of Walt Disney. I don't actually have a copy of that. If you happen to locate one, please, please, please let me know. Transcripts of the interviews proved valuable in my research. So were company records dating back to the earliest years. It was fascinating to read Walt's brave wires from New York to Roy, the give and take of a story meeting for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Walt's angry memo to those responsible for allowing a Disney character to appear in a beer commercial. I want to know who that was because I want to thrash him too. But as in any biography of recent personalities, the heart of the book emerged from the testimony of family, friends, and co-workers. My timing was fortunate. Although Roy O. Disney and Ub Iwerks had died, many who could relate Walt's early years were available. Wilfred Jackson and Les Clark had been present at the creation of Mickey Mouse. The 9 old men who had animated the features from Snow White onward still contributed their wonders at the studio. Walt's widow, Lillian, his daughters, and his sister, Ruth Disney Beecher, provided rare views of his personal life. As the interviews progressed, the figure of Roy O. Disney emerged in sharper focus. Less powered by ambition than his younger brother, Roy had been content to remain in the background during most of the studio's history. Only after Walt died and Roy was forced to assume the company leadership did he adopt a more public role. He invariably gave credit to Walt for fueling the studio's creative drive, and he insisted that the Florida park be named Walt Disney World as a permanent tribute. Many realized for the first time Roy's brilliance as a financier, as he had assembled the backing for the huge undertaking in Florida. Roy's widow Edna and his son Roy E. Disney and his co-workers contributed to the portrait of a man at peace with himself and devoted to his brother despite their sometimes angry disagreements. I'm sure my sister and I can say the same thing. Katie, I'm still really sorry about breaking your bathroom door with a dog collar that one time. I'm less sorry about the underwear on the ceiling fan because that was funny. Unlike Harry and Jack Warner and Jack and Harry Cohn, brothers at odds throughout their lives, Roy and Walt Disney maintained an ideal relationship. With most of the biographies I have had the good fortune to encounter, one person who provided extraordinary insight into the character of the person I was writing about. Sidney Buchman, the gifted filmmaker whose career was destroyed by the blacklist, gave me the key to Harry Cohn. Eddie Sherman, longtime manager of Abbott and Costello, helped me understand that contentious partnership. In the case of Walt Disney, the serendipity was Hazel George. She had been the studio nurse, a warm, understanding woman who administered to hangovers, colds, broken romances, and other ills suffered by studio workers. She also gave nightly treatments for Walt's pained neck in their laughing place, where they discussed happenings at the studio with utter candor. If Walt ever had a confidant, it was Hazel. I found her a few blocks from the studio in a modest apartment she shared with Paul Smith, who was retired and in poor health. He was a brilliant composer who had written music for the True Life Adventures and other films. Smith listened with amusement as Hazel poured out priceless stories about her exchanges with Walt. As you will read in the following pages, Walt Disney was Mickey Mouse, and Mickey Mouse was Walt Disney. I know you can't see it from here, and I'm not leaning any closer, but my brother got me this beautiful necklace that features a CZ Mickey, and I wear it all day, every day. Their personalities were inextricable, especially in the first years of Mickey's immense fame. The passage of time brought changes in how the public viewed both man and mouse. In the beginning, Mickey was viewed as fearless, resourceful, hungry for adventure. The mature Mickey became almost sedate, an amused spectator of the comedic antics of newer members of the cast. Now he reigns mostly as an iconic symbol. Mickey has suffered the devaluation of his name into a derogatory adjective. That's certainly a Mickey Mouse defense pattern, a football announcer might say, or an auto repairman could comment, "Whoever worked on your car sure did a Mickey Mouse job." The term has even entered the dictionaries as describing something childish, oversimplified, unrelated to reality, etc. The origin of the usage is clouded. Disney archivist Dave Smith has found no conclusive answer. Carl Nader, who was in charge of educational films in the 1930s and 1940s, recalled that a government auditor, after viewing the overhead charges for wartime film, cracked, "That's certainly Mickey Mouse accounting." Smith cites the term Mickey Mouse music, dating back to the early talkies. Mickey Mousing a score meant punching every movement on the screen with a musical beat. Serious film composers scorned the technique as music by the numbers. It's possible that the adjectival usage merely derived from the complicated and often futile schemes that Mickey cooked up in the early cartoons. The picture of Walt Disney in the public mind also changed during his lifetime and afterward. At the beginning, he was viewed as an inventive, creative genius whose work was admired by intellectuals as well as the masses. From Disneyland on, he became more of a builder, a cosmic dreamer. A quarter century after his death, the figure of Walt Disney has grown more remote, and some writers have tried to paint a picture of a man far different from the one remembered by those who knew him. If Walt Disney the man has grown amorphous in the public consciousness, he remains vivid and real to the survivors of the 9 old men, the artists who helped create the animation classics. There are 4 of them now, all vigorously involved in a variety of interests. I asked them for their memories of Walt. "He was a fair man," responded Ollie Johnston, "but had little patience for anything bad or weak. He had certain giveaways that you could detect. In the animation building, we had chairs with curved wooden arms. If Walt got bored during a conference, you'd hear the drumming of his fingers on the chair arm. He rarely complimented any of us. Even if he did approve of what you had done, he'd add, 'Of course you'll fix that little wiggle,' or something like that. It was a put-down, but it was good for us. We would work a little harder. Some guys would get cocky when they were complimented, and they wouldn't work for 2 weeks. Mark Davis. My feeling was that Walt was a guy who knew what he wanted to do and then found the way to do it. Number 1, he had to find the talent to carry out what he wanted to do. Sure, we were overworked and underpaid, but that didn't bother us. Walt didn't have a great deal of money himself. It wasn't until his last years that he was well off." Davis recalled accompanying Walt on a visit to the New York World's Fair with the idea of scouting the Disney-designed attractions which might fit into Disneyland. Walt declined the VIP tour and walked through the fair like any visitor. "I want to see how things work," he said. "I remember once when Walt was going to Europe and he was getting a haircut at the barbershop in the Penthouse Club," Davis said. "He told Sal the barber, 'Cut my hair a little different. I don't want to be recognized.' Sal said, 'If you don't want to be recognized, I'll shave off your mustache.' Walt immediately covered his upper lip. You knew he didn't want to be that unrecognized. He was an open book. Hello, Luther. Yes. Yes, that's just your tail in the picture. You know that, right? All right, come here, you baby. Yes, yes, yes. To me, he didn't seem a complicated man, observed Ward Kimball. He did seem to be a different man at different times, depending on his health, a hangover, or whatever. A lot of people said the best time to schedule a meeting with Walt was in the morning, when he was fresh. Others said he was grumpier in the morning, and afternoons were better. There were different schools of thought on that. Some fellows would dream up an idea and say confidently, "He'll go for it." Then they'd go in a meeting and he'd throw it out. After Walt died, guys continued saying, "Walt would go for this." They were wrong before he died and wrong afterward. What made them think they could read Walt's mind? Kimball remarked that Disney always believed in team play, yet nobody dared disagree with him. He cited a case of a studio composer who played a piece of music in a meeting. Walt shook his head and said, "You can do better." The composer gazed at his musicians and said, "Well, that's a good cross-section of one man's opinion." Kimball added, "He was gone by noon." Frank Thomas commented that Disney prided himself in his ability to handle each member of his creative team individually. The brilliant animator Milt Kahl was subject to periodic rages. The way to handle Milt is to let him cool off for a couple of days and then talk to him, Walt said. The director, Dave Hand, also had a fierce temper. Walt told Thomas, "When Dave gets mad, I always keep my desk between him and me. He's a big guy and you don't know what he's going to do." Frank Thomas remarked that Disney always sought a positive atmosphere in meetings. If you said no to his proposal, he'd say, "Why the hell can't I do that? We're trying to get ideas here. Maybe we won't get any good ones, but we sure won't if you take a negative attitude." That is the Walt Disney his animators knew, an uncomplicated man. And that's the preface as told by Bob Thomas in January 1994 in Encino, California. I am so excited about continuing this book for y'all. That's been Anna Reads, and this has been Walt Disney, an American Original by Bob Thomas. I promise you these videos would each be an hour long if I let myself just generally go on Disney things in general. But something I'll fill you in on right this second is there are never fewer than 4 hidden Mickeys on my person at any given point in time. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's not what you think it is. I found it on the floor in the movie theater when I was seeing Avengers Endgame. I came home and my mom had a fit. She goes, "What is that and where does it come from?" And I said, "Well, Mom, I found it on the floor in the movie theater." And she goes, "All right, Walt or Stan?" And I looked up and I said, both. I will be picking back up with Walt Disney, an American Original, as soon as I can. Right now, I would really love for everyone to keep up, if you can, a Disney level of hope. Right now, the parks are closed, and I'm having a really hard time coping with that, as I'm sure many people are. The parks have only closed once that I can recall, and it was a partial closure during Hurricane Katrina. We are all here for each other. We are all here to take care of each other. So please, remember you're the one who can fill the world with sunshine, as Snow White would say. Give me a thumbs up, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you want to contact me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Serenity_Sweet13, on Twitter at SerenitySweet13, no underscore. I don't know what that was, but feel free to contact me on Facebook if you found me through here. And you can always comment or direct message here on YouTube. All right. See you real soon. Why? Because we like you.